Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Even though very little may be known of such a man's feelings or views when he first arrives in a neighborhood, this truth is so firmly fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that they consider him as the rightful property of one or another of their daughters. One day, Mrs. Bennet said to her husband, "My dear, have you heard that Netherfield Park has been let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not, "But it has," returned she. "Mrs. Long has just been there, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. Mrs. Bennet, growing impatient, said, "Do you not want to know who has taken it? You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." This was invitation enough. "Oh, single, of course, a single man of large fortune, for 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls. How so? How can it affect them?" "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "how can you be so tiresome? You must know I am thinking of his marrying one of them." "Is that his design in settling here?" "Design? Nonsense, how can you talk so? But he may very well fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes. I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will be still better. For you are as handsome as any of them. Mr. Bingley may like you best of the party. I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will be still better. For you are as handsome as any of them. Mr. Bingley may like you best of the party." "You are overpraising me again, my dear," said Mrs. Bennet. "I certainly had my share of beauty once, but I am not to think of that now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to stop imagining she is still attractive." "Only when she has no beauty worth thinking of," replied Mr. Bennet. "But really, you must visit Mr. Bingley as soon as he arrives. It is more than I can promise, I assure you. Oh, but consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment one of them might secure. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go on purpose, and you know they are never inclined to visit newcomers. Indeed, you must go, otherwise we cannot call on him at all." "They have none of them much to recommend them," replied Mr. Bennet. "They are all silly and ignorant like other girls, but Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sisters." "Mr. Bennet, how can you speak of your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have the highest respect for your nerves. They have been my constant companion these 20 years at least. You do not know what I suffer, but I hope you will soon recover, and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. It will be no use to us if 20 such men came, since you would not visit any of them. When there are 20, I will visit them all." Mr. Bennet was a mixture of quick wit, sarcasm, reserve, and caprice, so that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient for his wife to understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to comprehend. She was a woman of little information, narrow views, and variable temper. When she was unhappy, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. Chapter 2. Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who visited Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to call on him, though he continued to assure his wife that he had no such plan. It was not until the evening after the visit had taken place that Mrs. Bennet learned of it. Observing her second daughter trimming a hat, he suddenly said, "Lizzie, I hope Mr. Bingley will like this bonnet." Mrs. Bennet was offended. "We cannot know what he will like since we are not to visit him." Elizabeth replied, "You forget, mamma. We shall meet him at the assembly, and Mrs. Long has promised to introduce us." "I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I do not trust her." Mr. Bennet interposed, "Nor I, but I am glad that you are not depending on her." Mrs. Bennet made no answer, but she could not restrain herself from scolding her daughters instead. "Kitty, do stop coughing like that. Have some regard for my nerves. I am quite worn out." Mr. Bennet added, "Kitty has no discretion in her coughs. She coughs at the wrong times." "I do not cough for pleasure," cried Kitty resentfully. "When is your next ball to be, Kitty?" "In a fortnight," Mrs. Bennet exclaimed. "So soon?" "Mrs. Long will not return until the day before the ball, so she cannot possibly introduce him. She does not even know him yet." Then you will have the advantage over her, my dear, by introducing Mr. Bingley to her. Impossible, my love, I cannot introduce a man I have never spoken to. How can you tease me so? I honor your prudence. 2 weeks is indeed too short a time to become properly acquainted. We cannot know a person's character in so brief an interval. However, if we are not bold, others will be. Mrs. Long and her nieces will certainly do what they can. If we do not move forward, they will think we mean to give them the field. The girls stared at their father. Mrs. Bennet only said, "Ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. What do you mean, my dear?" "That the form of introduction and the delicacy of the situation are ridiculous." "I cannot agree. Mary, what are your thoughts? You are a deep thinker and fond of books. You must have some reflections on the matter." Mary attempted to say something sensible but could not think of anything appropriate. "Well," said he, "while Mary is considering the matter, let us return to Mr. Bingley." "I am sick of hearing about Mr. Bingley," cried Mrs. Bennet. "I am sorry to hear that," said Mr. Bennet. "If I had known as much earlier this morning, I certainly would not have visited him. But as I have already done the deed, we cannot avoid the acquaintance now." The astonishment of the daughters was exactly what he had hoped. Mrs. Bennet, though even more astonished, soon felt only delight, for she believed the outcome to be exactly what she had wished all along. "My dear Mr. Bennet, how good you are, but I always knew you would be persuaded in the end. I know how much you care for your daughters. Oh, I am so delighted. And how clever you were to say nothing of it earlier." Mr. Bennet turned to Kitty and said, "Now, my dear, you may cough as much as you choose." He left the room, weary of his wife's enthusiastic expressions. Once the door had closed, Mrs. Bennet said to her daughters, "See what a good father you have. I do not know how you will ever repay him, even I scarcely know how. You must understand, with our age, forming new acquaintances is not so easy, yet your father and I do everything for your sake. And Lydia, though you are the youngest, I am sure Mr. Bingley will dance with you at the next ball." "I am not afraid," said Lydia boldly. "Though I am the youngest, I am the tallest." For the rest of the evening, the family busied themselves with guessing when Mr. Bingley would return Mr. Bennet's visit, and discussing how soon they might invite him to dinner. Chapter 3. Yet even with Mr. Bennet's visit, Mrs. Bennet could learn very little about Mr. Bingley, despite the united efforts of all 5 daughters. They attacked their father with every question, every guess, every hopeful fancy, every vague assumption they could think of, but he eluded them all. At last, they were forced to depend on indirect information from their neighbor, Lady Lucas. Her news was most favorable. Sir William was particularly impressed by Mr. Bingley. He was a young man, handsome, pleasant, and intending to bring a large party to the next ball. Nothing could be more delightful. A love for dancing was the surest step toward romance, and so everyone's expectations soared. Mrs. Bennet said to her husband, "If only I might see one of my daughters happily settled in Netherfield, and the others just as well married, I could wish for nothing more." A few days later, Mr. Bingley returned Mr. Bennet's visit. He sat with him for 10 minutes in the library, hoping to meet the young ladies whose beauty he had heard praised, but he was introduced only to their father. The young ladies, however, had the advantage of observing him from an upstairs window as he rode away in a blue coat upon a fine black horse. Soon after, an invitation to dinner was sent, and Mrs. Bennet made many preparations before she received the answer. Mr. Bingley had been obliged to go to London the following day and could not accept. Mrs. Bennet was disappointed. She could not imagine what business could call him away so soon after taking residence in Hertfordshire. She began to fear he might be the sort of young man who shifts about from place to place and never settles anywhere. Lady Lucas reassured her that Mr. Bingley had only gone to London to gather a group of friends for the ball. Soon, reports spread that he would bring 12 ladies and 7 gentlemen with him. The Bennet girls were distressed by such a number of ladies, but by the morning of the ball they heard that instead of 12, he would bring only 6 women, his 2 sisters, their husbands, and 1 young gentleman. When the ball began, his party consisted only of Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, his sister's husband, and another young man. Mr. Bingley was handsome and carried himself with ease. His manners were unaffected and pleasant. His sisters were fine women, with strong elegance in their behavior. Mr. Hurst, the sister's husband, was merely civil. But the friend, Mr. Darcy soon drew the attention of everyone in the room by his tall figure, fine features, noble air, and the rumor that he had 10,000 a year. Within 5 minutes, he was admired. The gentlemen pronounced him a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared him even more handsome than Mr. Bingley. For half the evening, he was the delight of all. But his manners quickly disgusted them. He was proud, above being pleased, and unwilling to mix or converse easily. His large estate in Derbyshire could not compensate for his disagreeable disposition. In comparison, Mr. Bingley shone even more brightly. Mr. Bingley made himself acquainted with everyone of importance in the room, danced every dance, complained that the ball ended too soon, and promised to give one at Netherfield. He was lively and unpretentious. His friend was the complete opposite. Mr. Darcy danced only twice, once with Mrs. Hurst and once with Miss Bingley. He declined being introduced to any other lady, walked about the room, talking only occasionally to his own party. Soon everyone agreed that he was the most disagreeable, proud man in the world, and all hoped he would never return. Mrs. Bennet disliked him most of all, for he had slighted one of her daughters. Because there were more women than men, Elizabeth Bennet had been forced to sit out to dances, during which Mr. Darcy stood near by speaking with Mr. Bingley, and she overheard them. "Come, Darcy," said Bingley, "you must dance. I hate to see you standing here so dull. Dancing is meant to be enjoyed." "I certainly shall not," answered Darcy. "You know how I detest dancing unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. I find no pleasure in a room full of people I do not care to know. Your sisters are engaged, and I would not consider dancing with any of the others. It would be torture." "Upon my word, I never saw so many pleasant girls," said Bingley. "There are a few truly lovely ones." Darcy glanced at the eldest Miss Bennet. "You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room. She is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting just behind you, very pretty and very agreeable. You must let me ask my partner to introduce her to you." Darcy turned to look at Elizabeth for a moment, met her gaze, and then turned away coldly. "She is tolerable, I suppose, but not handsome enough to tempt me. And I am in no humor to give consequence to ladies who are ignored by other men. You had better return to your partner." Bingley did so, and Darcy walked off. Elizabeth remained seated, with no sympathy left for him. But she soon laughed when telling the story to her friends, for she liked to find amusement in absurd things. The Bennet family left the ball in high spirits. Mrs. Bennet was delighted that Jane had been admired by everyone. Mr. Bingley had danced with her twice and paid her special attention. Jane was happy in her quiet way, and Elizabeth shared in her joy. Mary heard someone say that Jane was the most accomplished girl in the room. Catherine and Lydia were happy merely because they had danced all evening. They all returned to Longbourn full of excitement, where they found Mr. Bennet still awake. A book had kept him past his usual hour, and he was eager to hear how the evening had gone. Mrs. Bennet began at once. "Oh, my dear, we had the most delightful evening. Everyone admired Jane. Mr. Bingley danced with her twice. He danced the first with Miss Lucas, but did not care for her at all. He was enchanted with Jane the moment he danced with her. And then he asked about her, and then they danced again." "Oh, I assure you, nobody was admired like Jane," Mr. Bennet interrupted. "If he had any compassion, he would have danced only half as much. For heaven's sake, my dear, spare me the list of young ladies he danced with. Better to say he sprained his ankle and danced no more." Mrs. Bennet continued, undeterred, to praise Mr. Bingley and his sister's fine clothes, until at last, with sharp exaggeration and sour satisfaction, she recounted Mr. Darcy's rudeness. "But Lizzie does not lose much by being overlooked by him," she concluded. "He is the most disagreeable, hateful man. I quite detest him." Chapter 4. When they were alone, Jane spoke to Elizabeth of her feelings for Mr. Bingley, having previously been rather guarded in her praise. "He's just what a young man ought to be, sensible, cheerful, and lively. I never saw such manners so truly refined." Elizabeth smiled and replied, "He is also remarkably handsome. A young man should be all that, of course. He is the very model of good sense and good looks. I felt quite flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I had not expected to be noticed in such a way. Not expected it. I rather thought you deserved it. But that, dearest Jane, is the great difference between us. You are so ready to doubt your charm, while I am not. He would have been blind not to prefer you to every other woman in the room. There is no need to thank him for admiring you. He is a pleasant man, I agree, and I have no wish to stop you from liking him. You have fancied people far more foolish. Lizzie, you see the good in everyone. I do not think I have ever heard you speak ill of anyone. I do not wish to judge people harshly. I only say what I truly feel, I know. And that is what makes you so lovely. But your openness prevents you from seeing the folly and nonsense of others. Many people pretend to be straightforward, but yours is real and without vanity. You focus so much on the good in people that you overlook the bad. And so you find his sisters charming too, do you not? Their manners do not quite equal his. No, not at first, but after talking with them, I find them very agreeable. His elder sister will live with him and help manage his household. I am sure she will be a delightful neighbor. Elizabeth listened, but could not agree. She did not think the Miss Bingleys pleasant. With her sharp eye and firm judgment, she found their manners marked by pride and self-importance. They were handsome, educated in a fashionable school, possessed £20,000, and spent freely. They mixed only with the highest of society, and therefore believed they had a right to look down on others. Their family, respected in northern England, held more pride in their name than in the fortune earned by trade. Mr. Bingley's father had left nearly £100,000. He had intended to purchase an estate but died before doing so. Mr. Bingley planned to do the same, and had nearly decided on one, but for now was content to lease the nearby estate of Netherfield. Many who knew his nature doubted whether he would remain long in one place. His sisters wished strongly for him to buy a property of his own, but though they were only guests at Netherfield, Miss Bingley never hesitated to take the head of the table. Mrs. Hurst did the same, though she had married for appearance rather than wealth. Bingley had been shown the estate quite by chance, and after half an hour spent viewing it, was persuaded by its situation and comfort to agree immediately. Between him and Mr. Darcy there existed a steady friendship, though their characters were opposite. Bingley's open, easy temper suited Darcy, who valued Bingley's affection and trust. Bingley relied on Darcy's opinion, believing his judgment superior. Darcy was intelligent and careful, but also proud and reserved. Bingley, though less formally educated, was universally liked, while Darcy often offended without meaning to. Their conversation at the ball illustrated it perfectly. Bingley had never seen a woman as lovely as Jane. Everyone had been kind to him, he had already made many acquaintances, and Jane appeared to him like an angel. Darcy acknowledged her beauty, but thought she smiled too much. Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley thought the same, though they still admired her gentleness and agreed she was worth knowing better. Thus Jane, being universally considered sweet and graceful, gave Mr. Bingley every encouragement to think of her whenever he pleased. Chapter 5. A short distance from Longbourn lived a family, who were on very friendly terms with the Bennets. Sir William Lucas had once been engaged in trade at Meryton, where he had made a comfortable fortune, and had been knighted while serving as mayor. He had perhaps felt this honor a little too strongly. Disgusted with business and with the house connected to it, he left both and retired with his family to a residence about a mile from the town. He named it Lucas Lodge, where he could enjoy the satisfaction of being seen as a person of consequence, free from the demands of commerce, and devoted himself entirely to appearing the good, dignified gentleman. He took pleasure in his title, though without arrogance, for he was a friendly man, always willing to oblige. His natural desire to offend no one made him courteous and mild. The knighthood only polished these traits further. Lady Lucas was a good-natured woman, not particularly clever, and therefore a very suitable neighbor for Mrs. Bennet. They had several children. The eldest, a sensible and intelligent young woman of about 27, was a close friend of Elizabeth. It was absolutely necessary that the Bennet and Lucas girls meet to discuss the ball, and so the morning after, the Miss Lucases came to Longbourn to exchange news and impressions. Mrs. Bennet spoke to Miss Lucas with a composed air. "My dear Charlotte, you began the ball delightfully. You were Mr. Bingley's first choice." "Yes, but it seemed he preferred his second choice soon after," Charlotte replied. "Oh, you mean Jane. Well, he did dance with her twice. He certainly seems very taken with her." "Indeed, I heard something of the sort, though I cannot say what." "About Mr. Robinson, Charlotte continued. Perhaps you recall that I overheard Mr. Bingley speaking with Mr. Robinson. Mr. Robinson asked him how he liked the Meryton ball, whether he thought the women pretty, and which one he thought the prettiest. He answered immediately, "Oh, the eldest Miss Bennet, without question." "That shows he has intentions, though of course nothing may come of it yet," Mrs. Bennet said, though clearly delighted. Charlotte then turned to Elizabeth. "Well, Lizzie, my overheard conversation was surely better than yours. Mr. Darcy's remark was not worth hearing, but his friend's was. Poor Eliza, to be forced to endure such rudeness." Mrs. Bennet burst out, "Don't remind us of that dreadful man. If he ever does admire anyone, that person will be most unfortunate. Mrs. Long told me he sat beside her for half an hour without speaking a single word." Jane said gently, "Are you sure, mamma? I thought I heard him speaking with her." "Yes, because she asked him whether he liked Netherfield, and of course he had to answer. But she says he was quite offended at being spoken to," Jane offered. "Miss Bingley told me he never speaks much except to those he knows well. Among friends, she says, he is very agreeable." Mrs. Bennet sniffed. "I do not believe a word of it. If he were agreeable, he would have spoken to Mrs. Long. But no, everyone agrees he is proud, and I dare say it is because he has heard that Mrs. Long has no carriage of her own and must hire one for parties." Charlotte said, "I don't care whether he talks to Mrs. Long or not. I only wish he had danced with Lizzie." Mrs. Bennet turned to Elizabeth. "Another time, my dear. If I were you, I would not wish to dance with him." Elizabeth laughed. "Indeed, mamma, I promise you I will not dance with him, ever." Charlotte then spoke thoughtfully. "I do not find his pride disagreeable. A young man with his family, his fortune, why should he not feel a little above others? Pride can be justified." Elizabeth replied, "That may be true. I could forgive his pride, had he not wounded my own." Mary, with great seriousness, declared, "Pride is a very common failing. Human nature is prone to it. Very few of us do not cherish some degree of self-satisfaction. Vanity and pride, however, are different. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us." The younger Miss Lucas exclaimed, "If I were as rich as Mr. Darcy, I should not mind being proud. I would keep a pack of hounds and drink a bottle of wine every day." Mrs. Bennet laughed sharply. "And if I caught you, I would take the bottle away at once." The conversation continued in the same lively spirit until the parties separated. Chapter 6. Before long, all the ladies of Longbourn had paid their visit to Netherfield, and the call was properly returned. Jane Bennet's gentle and amiable disposition won the favor of Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley. Although they found her mother quite intolerable and considered her younger sisters unworthy of notice, they were none the less eager to cultivate the acquaintance of the eldest daughter. Jane was very pleased by their attentions, but Elizabeth still detected, in their manner of treating others and even Jane herself, a degree of arrogance which she could not like. Yet their civility towards Jane clearly influenced Mr. Bingley's feelings, for every time the two met, he displayed a sincere admiration for her. And Jane, on her part, grew increasingly fond of him. She was, however, happy that no one else seemed to notice this. She possessed, in an uncommon degree, a blend of serenity and cheerfulness, and these qualities concealed her feelings from those who delighted in meddling with the affairs of others. Elizabeth shared all this with Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte replied, "It may be wise to appear so to the world, but sometimes too much reserve is a disadvantage. If a young woman hides her feelings too carefully, she may lose the opportunity of engaging a man's attention, and then she will have nothing left but the consolation of knowing that others were as blind to her feelings as she herself. In nearly every attachment there must be a little gratitude or vanity involved. If everything is allowed to take its own course, nothing can be trusted. We may begin in a comfortable way, a slight, natural preference, perhaps, but very few of us are capable of falling deeply in love without encouragement from the other side. In 9 cases out of 10, a woman must show more affection than she truly feels. Bingley certainly likes your sister, but he may stop there unless she helps him forward." "But Jane does encourage him," said Elizabeth, "as much as her sense of propriety allows. If I, who know her so well, can perceive her feelings, he must be a simpleton indeed if he cannot. Eliza, remember that he does not understand Jane's character as you do." But if a woman has a particular affection for a man, and does not intentionally conceal it, he ought to find it out. He might indeed, if he were thoroughly acquainted with her. But though Jane and Bingley meet frequently, they never meet for long. As they are always in the midst of a large party, they have no opportunity for much conversation. Therefore Jane must seize every moment she can to secure his affection. Once she is sure of having won his heart, she may be as relaxed as she pleases. "Your plan is excellent in theory," said Elizabeth, "and if I were determined to marry a rich man or any man I would certainly follow it. But Jane has no such design, she has no intention of acting a part. She is not even certain of her own feelings yet, nor of the propriety of encouraging his. Once she is sure of having won his heart, she may be as relaxed as she pleases." "Your plan is excellent in theory," said Elizabeth, "and if I were determined to marry a rich man or any man I would certainly follow it. But Jane has no such design, she has no intention of acting a part. She is not even certain of her own feelings yet, nor of the propriety of encouraging his. She has known him barely a fortnight. She danced with him for times at Meryton, has seen him only once at his own house, and since then has had dinner with him, in company with others, just for times. Those opportunities are not enough for Jane to understand him well." "You are right, if one judges only by a dinner," replied Charlotte. "She could learn nothing more than whether he has a good appetite. But remember that they met on for evenings, and for evenings may produce a great deal." "Yes," said Elizabeth, "for evenings may show that they enjoy the same amusements. But as for their temperaments, I do not think much has been revealed." "Oh, I sincerely wish Jane success," Charlotte answered, "and if she were to marry him tomorrow, I believe she would have as good a chance of happiness as if she had studied his character for 12 months. Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. If the dispositions of the couple are ever so well matched, or ever so different, it does not make much difference. They always intend to alter each other after marriage, and this is enough to produce mutual discomfort. Therefore, it is better to know as little as possible of the faults of the person with whom one is to spend one's life." Elizabeth laughed. "My dear Charlotte, you amuse me exceedingly. But what you say will not do at all, and you know it will not do. You would never act in such a manner." While Elizabeth was occupied with watching the progress of her sister's attachment to Bingley, she was far from suspecting that she herself had become an object of interest to Mr. Bingley's friend. Darcy had at first scarcely allowed her to be pretty. He had seen her at the Meryton assembly without feeling the slightest admiration. Afterwards he had looked at her only to criticize. But no sooner had he discovered, and declared aloud to his friends, that he could hardly discern a good feature in her face, than he suddenly began to notice an unusual intelligence in her expression, and a remarkable liveliness in her dark eyes. This discovery brought him no small degree of mortification. For though his own fastidious judgment still considered her figure rather ungraceful, he was obliged to admit that it had a light, pleasing appearance. And though he thought her manners not at all those of fashionable society, he found himself caught by the playfulness of her wit. All this passed entirely unnoticed by Elizabeth. To her he was only a man who never seemed comfortable anywhere, and who had once pronounced her to play and to tempt him to dance. He soon wished for an opportunity of discovering more about her, and, as a first step towards conversing with her, he joined in the discussions she held with others. This attracted her attention. It happened one evening at a large gathering at Lucas Lodge. Elizabeth said to Charlotte, "What can be the meaning of Darcy's joining in the conversation I was having with Colonel Forster? That is a question which only he can answer, but if he does it again, I shall certainly let him know what I think of him. He has such a scornful, provoking air that, unless I begin boldly, I shall grow afraid of him." Immediately afterwards, Darcy approached, though with an air suggesting no intention of speaking. Miss Lucas dared Elizabeth to bring up the matter they had just discussed. Elizabeth, thus challenged, turned to him and said, "Mr. Darcy, do you not think I made a delightful remark just now when I teased Colonel Forster about organizing a ball at Meryton?" "I am entirely in favor of it," he replied, "but I imagine it is a subject you ladies always support with great enthusiasm. You are severe upon us. Now it is your turn to be teased, Eliza. I shall strike up the tune, and you will know how to follow," cried Lucas, referring to her playing. "You are very strange, Charlotte always wanting me to perform before company. If my vanity has grown into music and verse, It is entirely your doing. But I cannot be expected to perform before those who are determined to see the best performance. However, as Miss Lucas insisted, Elizabeth continued, glancing at Darcy, well then, if I must, I must. There is a very good proverb, well known to everyone here, take care of your breath to cool your porridge, so I shall take care of mine and save it for singing. Her performance was charming, though by no means extraordinary. After one or two songs, and before she could comply with further requests, the opening notes of another instrument were heard. Mary had seated herself at the piano. Mary, the most earnest yet least gifted of the Bennet sisters, was always eager to display her improvements. She had neither genius nor taste, but her vanity made her diligent, and gave her an affected solemnity and a pedantic air that were more likely to offend than to please. Elizabeth, easy and good-natured, listened with real pleasure, though her sister's skill was far inferior to her own. At the close of Mary's concerto, she was delighted to be encouraged by the younger girls to continue with some Scottish and Irish airs. The younger sisters were dancing at the far end of the room with the Miss Lucases and several officers. Darcy stood in silent contempt of the whole evening's entertainment, keeping himself apart from every conversation. Lost in thought, he sank deeper into, lost in his own reflections. Darcy did not notice Sir William standing beside him until the latter spoke. Mr. Darcy, it is delightful to see the young people enjoying themselves. There is nothing like dancing. I consider dancing the first refinement of polished society. Certainly, sir, said Darcy, and it is also the favorite amusement of the societies you call less polished. Every savage can dance. Sir William only smiled. I was particularly pleased with your friend's performance. He paused a moment as Bingley joined them, then continued, and I am sure, Mr. Darcy, that you are a connoisseur of the elegant arts. I believe you saw me dance at Meryton, said Darcy. Yes, indeed, I was most gratified by the sight. Do you often dance at St. James's? Never, sir. You do not think proper praise ought to be given to so distinguished a place. It is praise I have never bestowed on any place, where I could avoid it. I presume you live in town, sir. Darcy merely bowed. I once thought of settling in town myself, Sir William continued, for I am very fond of refined society. But I fear the air of London would not agree with Lady Lucas. He paused for an answer, but Darcy showed no inclination to speak. Just then Elizabeth approached, and a sudden thought of gallantry entered his mind. My dear Eliza, why are you not dancing? Mr. Darcy, allow me the honor of presenting this young lady to you as a most desirable partner. I am sure you cannot refuse when so lovely a creature stands before you. Taking her hand, he would have led her to Darcy, who looked genuinely surprised, though not entirely unwilling had she not instantly drawn back with some confusion. Indeed, sir, I had no intention of dancing at all. Pray do not imagine that I came here in search of a partner. Darcy, with perfect politeness, requested the honor of her hand, but she refused. Elizabeth was determined. Even Sir William's persuasion could not move her. Eliza, you dance so beautifully that it is unkind not to let me see you. Though this gentleman does not often join the amusement, I am sure he would oblige us for half an hour. Elizabeth smiled. Mr. Darcy is merely being civil. That may be, but, my dear Miss Elizabeth, under the present circumstances, it would not be surprising at all if you were quite willing, for who could refuse you? Elizabeth cast him a mischievous look and walked away. Her refusal did her no harm in Darcy's mind. He was thinking of her with some pleasure when Miss Bingley approached. I can guess the subject of your meditation, she said. I should be surprised if you could. You are thinking how insupportable it is to pass such an evening as this among such society. I quite agree. I have never been more annoyed. The insipidity, the noise, the self-importance. I wish I could hear you denounce them as strongly as I do. You are entirely mistaken, said Darcy calmly. My mind enjoys a very pleasant state. I am meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow. Miss Bingley immediately fixed her eyes on his, eager to discover who the lady might be. Darcy, with perfect composure, replied, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, I am astonished. And how long has this admiration lasted, and pray, when am I to wish you joy? That is the question I expected you to ask. A woman's imagination is so rapid it leaps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony. You intend, I know, to congratulate me. No indeed, if you are serious, I shall consider the affair absolutely settled. You will have a most charming mother-in-law. I dare say she will be frequently at Pemberley with you. Darcy listened with perfect indifference, while Miss Bingley, delighted to tease him, continued with even greater playfulness when she saw that he remained unbothered. Chapter 7. Mr. Bennet's income consisted almost entirely of £2,000 a year. Unfortunately for his daughters, the estate was entailed upon a distant male relation. Mrs. Bennet's own fortune could do little to supply the deficiency. Her father had been an attorney in Meryton and had left her £4,000. She had a sister who married Mr. Phillips, who had served as clerk to her father and afterwards succeeded to his practice. Another of her siblings, a brother, lived in London, engaged in trade and of some small reputation. Longbourn was only 1 mile from Meryton, an easy distance for young ladies who wished to walk there 3 or 4 times a week to visit their aunt and, incidentally, to stop by the milliners' shops. In particular, the 2 youngest Miss Bennets, Catherine and Lydia, frequently made such excursions, their minds being less occupied than those of their elder sisters. When they had nothing better to do, they felt compelled to walk to Meryton for the morning's amusement, and to gather fresh topics for conversation in the evening. Even when no news of consequence was stirring, they never failed to extract something from their aunt. At present, they had just learned that a regiment of militia had come to be quartered in the town for the winter, with Meryton as its headquarters. Their visits to Mrs. Phillips now produced tidings of real importance. Each day they learned new names of officers and the connections between them. The place of their encampment could not long remain a secret, and soon the girls were acquainted with them all. Mr. Phillips had already made calls upon every one of them, which opened to his nieces a source of delight never before imagined. They talked of nothing but the officers. The great fortune of Mr. Bingley, which had once excited their mother so greatly, now became insignificant in the eyes of the youngest Miss Bennet. After listening to their chatter the whole morning, Mr. Bennet observed coolly, "From the manner in which you speak, I am convinced you are the docilest girls in the country. I had suspected as much before, but now I am convinced." Catherine blushed and made no reply, but Lydia, perfectly unconcerned, went on talking about how fond she was of Captain Carter, and how she hoped to see him that very day, for he was to leave for London on the morrow. Mrs. Bennet exclaimed, "Oh, Mr. Bennet, I am astonished that you could think your own children silly. I may despise the children of others, but not my own." "If my children are foolish," he replied, "I shall always feel compassion for them. In any case," said she, "I believe they are all extremely clever. I flatter myself that this is the only point on which we disagree. I had hoped that our opinions might coincide in everything. But now I must differ from you in believing that our 2 youngest girls are uncommonly foolish. You must not expect all your children to have as much sense as their parents. When they are as old as I am, I dare say they will think no more of officers than I do. I remember the time when I was very fond of red coats, and in truth, even now I cannot quite forget them. If a young colonel, handsome and with 5 or 6,000 a year, were to want one of my girls, I would not refuse him. I thought Colonel Foster looked extremely smart in his regimentals at Sir William's last night," Lydia exclaimed. "Mamma, my aunt says Colonel Foster and Captain Carter do not visit Mrs. Watson as often as they did when they first arrived. Now they are mostly to be found in Clark's library." Before Mrs. Bennet could reply, a servant brought Jane a letter from Netherfield and waited for an answer. Mrs. Bennet's eyes sparkled with delight, and she cried eagerly as Jane read, "Well, Jane, who is it from? What does he say?" "Jane, read faster and tell us everything quickly, my love. It is from Miss Bingley." She then read aloud, "My dearest friend, if you are not kind enough to dine with Louisa and me today, we shall be in danger of becoming enemies for life. For a quarrel between 2 women can never be resolved when one of them insists on having the last word. When you receive this, pray come immediately. My brother and a few officers are to dine with us. Yours affectionately, Caroline Bingley." With the officers, Lydia exclaimed, "I wonder why our aunt did not tell us about this." Mrs. Bennet said sorrowfully, "To dine at their house, how unfortunate." Jane asked, "May I take the carriage?" "No, my dear, you had better ride on horseback, for it looks as though it may rain, and then you will of course have to stay the night." "That may be a clever scheme," Elizabeth said, "if you are certain they will not offer to send her home." "Oh, But the gentleman will use Mr. Bingley's carriage to return to Meryton, and Mr. and Mrs. Hurst have no horses. But I would prefer the carriage, Jane insisted. My dear, I am sure your father does not wish to spare the horses. We need them for the farm, do we not, Mr. Bennet? I often need them, but I very seldom have the use of them, Elizabeth remarked. But if Papa were to use the horses today, Mamma's plan would be defeated. At last she persuaded her father to declare the horses unavailable. Jane was therefore obliged to ride, and her mother sent her off at the door with many predictions of bad weather. Her hopes were fulfilled. It began to rain heavily soon after Jane left. Her sisters were anxious for her, but Mrs. Bennet rejoiced. The rain continued throughout the evening, making Jane's return impossible. And Mrs. Bennet's joy increased further the next morning when a servant brought Elizabeth a letter from Netherfield. My dearest Lizzie, I am quite unwell this morning, I believe, from being caught in the rain yesterday. My friends here will not hear of my returning home until I am better. They insist that I see Mr. Jones, so do not be alarmed at hearing he has been sent for. Except for a sore throat and a headache, I am not seriously ill. Your sister. After Elizabeth finished reading, Mr. Bennet said, Well, my dear, if your daughter should become dangerously ill, and if anything unfortunate should occur, you will at least have the comfort of knowing that it arose entirely from your pursuit of Mr. Bingley, following your own directions. Nonsense, I am sure it is nothing serious. Nobody dies of a trifling cold. She will be well taken care of. I would go to see her myself if only I had the carriage. Elizabeth, however, was genuinely concerned, and resolved to visit Jane even without a carriage. As she could not ride, she had no choice but to walk. When she declared her intention, Mrs. Bennet cried out, How can you be so foolish, with all the dirt? When you arrive, you will be exhausted and look a fright. I shall be fit enough to see how Jane is, that is all I care about. Lizzie, do you mean to ask your father to let you take the carriage? No, indeed. I am not trying to avoid walking. The distance is not far, only 3 miles when one has a purpose. I shall be home by dinner, Mary said. Mary said, I admire your kindness, but every impulse of feeling ought to be guided by reason. In my view, you should act only as far as necessity requires. Catherine and Lydia expressed their wish to accompany their sister to Meryton. Elizabeth agreed, and the three set off together. Lydia said, If we walk quickly, I may still see Captain Carter and have a little word with him before he leaves. They parted at Meryton. Her two younger sisters went to the officers' wives' quarters, while Elizabeth continued on alone, hurrying across fields with quick, steady steps, jumping over stalls and springing across puddles. She finally arrived exhausted, her stockings dirty, and her cheeks glowing from exertion. She was shown into the breakfast parlor, where everyone was assembled except Jane. Her appearance caused the utmost surprise. Mr. Hurst and Miss Bingley could scarcely believe Elizabeth had walked 3 miles so early in the morning, alone, and in such muddy weather. Elizabeth was convinced they looked down on her for it. Even so, they received her with perfect politeness, and the gentleman's manners showed something more than mere civility. Mr. Darcy spoke little, and Mr. Hurst said almost nothing. Darcy's thoughts were occupied with admiration of the brightened loveliness the walk had brought to her face, though accompanied by suspicion as to her real motive for making such a journey alone. After she inquired about Jane's condition, but the answer was not encouraging. Jane had slept badly, was feverish and weak, and still confined to her room. Elizabeth gratefully accepted the offer to go upstairs. Jane, though too ill to talk much, was overjoyed to see her. When Miss Bingley withdrew to give the sisters privacy, Jane could do little more than express her gratitude for the kindness she had received. Elizabeth sat quietly by her, attending to her needs. After breakfast, the Bingley sisters joined the two girls, and Elizabeth began to feel warmly toward them as she saw their genuine concern for Jane. The apothecary was called, and declared that Jane had caught a severe cold, advising everyone to be realistic about her condition. She needed strict confinement to her bed. His advice was immediately followed, for the fever had grown worse, and her headache was violent. Elizabeth refused to leave her sister's side, and the household came in frequently to inquire after her. When the clock struck 3, Elizabeth felt she ought to go home, though she dearly wished to stay. Miss Bingley offered the use of the family carriage. Elizabeth secretly hoped they would press her a little, for she longed to remain with Jane. Jane, too, showed reluctance at the thought of her leaving. Miss Bingley then formally invited Elizabeth to stay at Netherfield as long as necessary, and Elizabeth gratefully accepted. A servant was immediately dispatched to Longbourn to announce the news and bring back clothes. Chapter 8. At 5 o'clock, Jane and Elizabeth changed their clothes and came down to dinner. Everyone inquired after Jane's health, and Elizabeth saw that Bingley was truly and deeply concerned for her. Yet she could give no encouraging reply. Jane was no better. 3 or 4 times the sisters expressed how distressed they felt about Jane's illness, declaring themselves exceedingly grieved that they could be of no service to her. And then they ceased to think of the matter altogether. Their indifference toward Jane when she was absent returned Elizabeth to the unfavorable opinion she had first formed of them. In truth, Bingley was the only one for whom she retained any real regard. He was evidently anxious for Jane, and his manner was so proper, so free from officious intrusion, that Elizabeth felt no sense of her sister's privacy being violated, as she did with the others. She had no wish to concern herself with anyone else. Miss Bingley, wholly captivated by Darcy, attached herself closely to him, while Mr. Hurst, seated beside Elizabeth, proved a lazy man who lived for nothing but eating, drinking, and cards. When he discovered that she preferred plain dishes to his favorite ragout, he seemed at a loss for any further conversation. As soon as dinner was over, Elizabeth returned immediately to Jane. And no sooner had she quitted the room than Miss Bingley began to speak ill of her. Her conduct was petty and showed a mixture of pride and ill nature. She declared that Elizabeth had neither conversation, taste, nor beauty. Mrs. Hurst agreed entirely, adding, "In short, she has nothing to recommend her but her fine walking. I shall never forget how wild she looked when she came in this morning." "Exactly so, Louisa. It is hardly to be tolerated. How absurd to come all that way. Why should she tramp across so many miles just because her sister has a cold? Her hair was so untidy. And her petticoat," added Mrs. Hurst, "I wish you had seen it 6 inches deep in mud. And her gown, which she had let down to hide it, but it had not done its office." Bingley said, "You may describe her attire very accurately, but it makes no difference to me. I thought Miss Elizabeth looked remarkably well when she came in this morning." "I did not notice her petticoat," Miss Bingley replied. "Mr. Darcy, I am sure you must have observed it. And I am equally sure that you would never wish to see your sister in such a state." "Certainly not," said Darcy. "To walk 3 or 4 miles or any number through dirt, alone, what could she mean by it? It seems to me a most improper display of independence, a sort of wilful disregard of decorum quite typical of the very rusticity of country towns. It shows her affection for her sister, which is very pleasing," said Bingley, defending her. Miss Bingley whispered softly to Darcy, "Mr. Darcy, I fear this little adventure has lessened your admiration for her fine eyes." "Not at all," he replied. "Her eyes were brightened by the exercise." After a short pause, Mrs. Hurst began again. "I am extremely fond of Jane Bennet. She is a most sweet girl, and with all my heart I wish her well settled. But with such a father and mother, and such low connections, I am afraid there is no chance of it." "I have heard," said Miss Bingley, "that their uncle is an attorney in Meryton." "Yes, and they have another who lives somewhere near Cheapside." Her sister added, "That is capital." And both ladies laughed with great satisfaction. Bingley exclaimed, "If they had uncles enough to fill all of Cheapside, it would not make them one jot less agreeable." Darcy said, "But it must materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in the world." Bingley made no answer, but his sisters warmly agreed, and continued for some time to ridicule the Bennet family's humble connections. However, their manners softened again when they returned to Jane's room after dinner. They sat with her until coffee was announced. Jane was still very ill, and Elizabeth refused to leave her. Only when her sister had fallen into a gentle sleep late that night did Elizabeth consider going downstairs. When she entered the drawing-room, she found the others at cards. They immediately invited her to join, but she declined, saying she must remain attentive to Jane and preferred to amuse herself with a book for a little while. Mr. Hurst stared. "You prefer reading to cards? What a peculiar taste." Miss Bingley added mockingly, "Miss Eliza Bennet despises cards. She is a great reader and has no pleasure in anything else." Elizabeth replied, "I deserve neither such praise nor such censure. I am not a great reader, and I have many other enjoyments." You take pleasure in nursing your sister, and we sincerely hope you will be more comfortable when she recovers," said Bingley. Elizabeth silently thanked him and went to a table where several books lay. He immediately offered to fetch her more from the library. "I wish my collection were larger, for your sake and for my own instruction," he said. "But though I am fond of reading, I am too idle to make any great progress." Elizabeth assured him the books at hand suited her perfectly. Caroline Bingley turned to Darcy. "I am astonished that my father left so few books. Your library at Pemberley is delightful." "It is indeed well stocked," said Darcy. "It has been the work of many generations. And you always add to it. You are fond of buying books. I cannot comprehend the neglect of a family library in these days." "Neglect? My dear Darcy, you are incapable of neglecting anything that would beautify your estate. Charles, when you build your house, I hope it will be at least half as handsome as Pemberley." "I shall aim for it," said Bingley. But I particularly advise you to buy an estate in that neighborhood. There is not a finer county in England than Derbyshire. I would gladly buy Pemberley itself if Darcy would sell it." "Charles," cried Caroline, "you are talking of impossibilities." "And yet," said he, "I consider the chance of acquiring it by purchase far more likely than of coming to it merely by fancy." Elizabeth was so astonished by the direction the conversation had taken that she forgot her book. Soon she set it aside completely and went to observe the card table, standing between Bingley and his eldest sister. Miss Bingley said, "Has Miss Darcy grown much since the spring? Is she as tall as I am yet?" "I think she is now about Miss Elizabeth's height, or perhaps rather taller. I long to see her again. I never met anyone so amiable. Her face and manner are charming, and her performance on the pianoforte is exquisite." Bingley said, "I am astonished that young ladies can achieve so much. They are all prodigiously accomplished." "All accomplished, my dear Charles, what do you mean?" "Yes, all. They all paint tables, cover screens, and net purses. Hardly anyone fails to do these things." "And I am sure every young lady you mention is proficient," Darcy said. "Your list of commonplace accomplishments is quite accurate. The world is full of women who deserve no higher praise than for netting purses and covering screens. But I cannot agree with you. Among all the women I know, I cannot claim to know half a dozen truly accomplished," Miss Bingley added. "Nor I am sure," Elizabeth said. "Then your definition of an accomplished woman must be indeed comprehensive." "It is," Darcy replied gravely. Miss Bingley, eager to assist, said, "A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages to deserve the word. And she must possess something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or she is not truly accomplished." Darcy added, "And to all this she must yet improve her mind by extensive reading." Elizabeth laughed. "I am no longer surprised that you know so few accomplished women. I wonder if you know any at this moment. Are you so severe upon your own sex as to doubt the possibility? I have never yet seen one in whom all these qualities were united." Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley protested loudly, insisting that they knew many such women. But Mr. Hurst interrupted irritably, complaining that they were forgetting their business of the moment. All conversation ceased, and shortly after, Elizabeth withdrew. Once she was gone, Miss Bingley said, "Elizabeth Bennet is one of those young women who seek to recommend themselves by undervaluing their own abilities. It succeeds with many people, but to me it is a paltry trick," Darcy replied. "All such arts are contemptible, every kind of cleverness that has a little meanness in it." Miss Bingley was not quite satisfied, but could not continue the subject when Elizabeth re-entered to say that Jane had grown worse and she could not leave her. Bingley insisted that Mr. Jones be sent for immediately, while his sisters, declaring that a country doctor could do nothing, proposed summoning a physician from town. Elizabeth disagreed with them but was not opposed to Bingley's suggestion. It was settled that if Jane were no better by morning, Mr. Jones should be called. Bingley was plainly distressed. His sisters declared themselves deeply afflicted, yet after dinner they relieved their sorrow by singing duets, while Mr. Bingley did little but give orders that every attention be paid to the patient and her sister. Chapter 9. Elizabeth passed the night in her sister's room. In the morning, a message of inquiry from Mr. Bingley and his sisters was delivered to them, and Elizabeth was glad to hear from the apothecary that his report was not alarming. Though Jane was somewhat better, she still wished that a note be sent to Longbourn, informing the family of her condition and expressing her desire that their mother come to visit. The letter was dispatched immediately, and Mrs. Bennet, accompanied by her two youngest daughters, arrived at Netherfield shortly after breakfast. Had Mrs. Bennet believed Jane to be in real danger, she would undoubtedly have been miserable. But finding her daughter's illness not at all threatening, she had no desire for her to recover too quickly and be obliged to leave Netherfield. Consequently, she paid no attention to Jane's request to be taken home. The apothecary, too, advised against it. After sitting with Jane for a short while, the four Bennet ladies were invited by Miss Bingley into the breakfast parlour. Mr. Bingley greeted them with the hope that Mrs. Bennet had not imagined Jane's illness to be worse than it truly was. Mrs. Bennet replied, "Indeed, I fear her illness is quite severe, for she is not able to move at all. Mr. Jones says she must not be taken out of bed. We are, therefore, compelled to trouble your family a little longer." Bingley exclaimed, "Move her, it must not be thought of. I am very sure my sisters would be most unwilling for her to be moved." Miss Bingley added politely, "You may depend upon us, ma'am. Miss Bennet shall receive every possible care while she remains here." Mrs. Bennet thanked her with great warmth. She continued, "I am quite certain that without such good friends as you, I do not know what would become of my Jane. She is indeed much weakened and has suffered greatly, though she bears everything with such patience. She has the sweetest temper of any girl I ever knew. I am always telling my other girls they cannot compare with her. Mr. Bingley, you have a most charming room here, and that lovely gravel walk outside makes the view delightful. I have never seen anything so beautiful as Netherfield. I do hope you have no intention of leaving it soon, though I know your lease is only a short one," Bingley replied. "I make all my decisions in a hurry, so if I should resolve to leave Netherfield, I might be gone in 5 minutes. But for the present, I feel quite disposed to remain." Elizabeth said, "That is exactly what I expected of you. You are beginning to understand me, are you not?" he exclaimed, turning to her. "Indeed, I think I understand you quite well," said Elizabeth. "I hope that is meant as a compliment." "Yet to be thoroughly understood is a sad fate for a man," he replied playfully. "But surely a man of such depth and refinement as yourself need not make an effort to appear more mysterious than he is," she answered. Mrs. Bennet interposed, "Lizzie, remember where you are. Do not behave as freely as you do at home," Bingley added at once. "I had no idea you were so fond of studying character, Miss Elizabeth. It must be a most engaging pursuit, yes, especially when the characters are complex." "At least there is some advantage in that," Elizabeth replied, "but the whole country can furnish only a few such specimens. In rural neighborhoods we move in very small circles, and they change but little," Bingley observed. "But people themselves change so much," Elizabeth said, "that one can always observe something new in them." Mrs. Bennet, offended by his mention of rural limitations, said sharply, "Yes, indeed, I assure you there are as many such changes in the country as in the town." Everyone was astonished. Darcy, after looking at her for a moment, turned silently away. Believing she had gained a triumph over him, Mrs. Bennet pressed her advantage. "For my part, I do not see that London has any great superiority over the country, except in the shops and public places. The country is far more pleasant, is it not, Mr. Bingley?" Bingley replied cheerfully, "When I am in the country, I never wish to leave it. And when I am in town, it is just the same. Each place has its own attractions, and I am happy wherever I am." "Exactly so, for you have an even temper. But this gentleman here," she cast a look at Darcy, "seems to think the country is nothing at all." Elizabeth blushed for her mother. "Mamma, you quite misunderstood Mr. Darcy. He merely meant that the society in the country is not so varied as it is in town. You must admit that is true. Indeed, my dear, I do not deny it. But as for not meeting with enough people, I am sure there are few neighborhoods larger than ours. We have dined with more than 40 families." Only Bingley's concern for Elizabeth enabled him to maintain his composure. His sisters were less considerate, and Miss Bingley exchanged a significant glance with Mr. Darcy, wishing to divert her mother from further imprudence. Elizabeth asked whether Charlotte Lucas had called at Longbourn since she had left. "Yes, she came with her father. Sir William is truly an agreeable man, is he not, Mr. Bingley? So fashionable, so gentle, so perceptive. He always has something pleasant to say to everyone." That is my idea of a well-bred gentleman. Those who fancy themselves important and never open their mouths are entirely mistaken. Did Charlotte dine with your mother? No, she wished to return home. I suppose the person she felt she must hurry back to was the mince pie. As for me, Mr. Bingley, I always keep servants who know how to do their work. My daughters are brought up differently, but let everyone judge for themselves. The Miss Lucases are very good girls, I assure you, though, sadly, they are not handsome. Not that Charlotte is plain, far from it, but still, she is a particular friend of our family. Bingley said, she seems a very amiable young woman. Oh, indeed she is, but you must admit she is not handsome. Lady Lucas herself often says so, and envies our Jane. I do not like to boast of my children, but certainly Jane is the prettiest girl in the neighborhood. Everyone says so. When she was 15, a young man who was staying with my brother Gardner in town was so much in love with her that my sister-in-law thought he would surely propose. But in the end he did not. Perhaps he thought her too young. Still, he wrote her some very beautiful verses. Elizabeth impatiently said, and so ended his love. I imagine many others have overcome their sorrow in the same way. I wonder who first discovered that poetry could drive away love. I have always thought poetry the food of love, said Darcy. Perhaps so, if it is strong, devoted, well-established love, anything powerful can be nourished. But for a weak and fleeting affection, a short poem might starve it completely. Darcy only smiled, and the brief pause that followed made Elizabeth fear her mother might again expose her silliness. She wished to say something, anything to prevent it, but could not think how to begin. Then Mrs. Bennet once more launched into her thanks to Bingley for taking such good care of Jane, along with an apology for Lizzie's intrusion. Bingley replied with perfect politeness, and his sister was forced to say a few civil words as well. Miss Bingley tried to play her part, though without much elegance enough, however, to satisfy Mrs. Bennet. Soon after, Mrs. Bennet ordered the carriage. At this signal, the youngest daughter accompanied her out. The two girls had been whispering together throughout the visit, with the result that the younger now insisted that Bingley give a ball at Netherfield. Lady O was a strong, rosy-cheeked, lively girl of 15, the favorite of her mother, who had pushed her into society far too early. Her high spirits and self-importance earned her attention from the officers and from her uncle's household. With her easy manners, these interactions only increased her confidence. Thus she felt quite equal to pressing Bingley about the ball and boldly reminding him of his promise. She added that it would be the greatest shame in the world if he failed to keep his word. His answer delighted Mrs. Bennet. You may depend upon it, I shall be most happy to keep my promise. And when your sister is recovered, you may fix the day yourself, though I imagine you would not care to dance while she is still ill. Oh yes, indeed. We had better wait until Jane is quite well, and by then Captain Carter will likely have returned to Meryton. And when you give your ball, I shall insist they give one as well. I will tell Colonel Foster that it would be shameful for him to refuse. Mrs. Bennet and her two daughters took their leave. Elizabeth returned to Jane, leaving her mother's behavior and that of her sisters to be judged by the two ladies and Darcy. But Darcy had no wish to join in their criticisms, although Miss Bingley hinted broadly with her expressive eyes. Chapter 10. The day passed much like the one before. Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley spent several hours in the morning sitting with Jane, who was gradually recovering. In the evening, Elizabeth joined them in the drawing-room. Mr. Darcy was writing a letter, while Miss Bingley sat beside him, constantly watching every stroke of his pen, distracting him from his correspondence to his sister. Mr. Hurst and Bingley were occupied with a card game, and Mrs. Hurst observed them play. Elizabeth, though engaged with her needlework, could not help taking interest in the scene between Darcy and Miss Bingley. Their odd little conversation amused her and aligned perfectly with her observations of their characters. Miss Bingley's constant flattery of Darcy's handwriting and elegant penmanship, and Darcy's absolute indifference to such compliments. Miss Darcy will be delighted to receive your letter, I am sure, she said. Darcy did not answer. You write so extraordinarily fast. You are mistaken. I write rather slowly. Think how many letters you must have the opportunity of writing in a year. And all those business letters as well. I detest such letters. Then it is fortunate that such letters fall to my lot instead of yours. Be so good as to tell your sister that I am most anxious to see her again. I have already conveyed that message, as you requested. I fear you do not like your pen. Do let me mend it for you. I mend pens remarkably well. Thank you, but I always repair my own. How do you contrive to write so evenly? Darcy remained silent. And be sure to tell your sister how delighted I am with her improvement on the pianoforte. Pray let her know that I am extremely taken with her little design for the table, and I think it far superior to Miss Grantley's. May I ask you to postpone your delights to the next letter? I have not room for them now. Oh. I shall see her in January, so it is of little consequence. But do you often write such long, charming letters, Mr. Darcy? My letters are usually long, though whether they are charming or not is another matter. I have always observed that writing a long letter is generally a sign of being able to make it interesting. Bingley exclaimed, Caroline, that is no compliment to Darcy, for he does not write his letters with ease. He has made great progress in uncouthness, has he not, Darcy? My style is very different from yours, Darcy replied. Oh yes, Charles writes in the most careless manner imaginable, Miss Bingley added. He leaves out half the words and blots the rest. My ideas flow so rapidly that I cannot always express them properly. Thus my letters often fail to convey what I intend, Elizabeth said. Mr. Bingley, your modesty prevents anyone from finding fault with you. Nothing is more deceitful than the appearance of modesty, said Darcy. It is often merely carelessness of opinion, and sometimes an indirect boast. And to which class do you suppose my little display of modesty belongs? To the latter. You are secretly proud of the faults in your letter writing, because you attribute them to the rapidity of your thoughts and your disdain for meticulousness. Teachers tend to admire quickness in everything, and rarely value perfection. When you told Mrs. Bennet this morning that if you decided to leave Netherfield, you would be gone in 5 minutes, that was a kind of self-congratulation. Yet what praise is due to hastiness which must leave necessary business unfinished and is of no benefit to yourself or anyone else? No, no, that is too much. To recall, at this hour of the evening, the foolish things said earlier today is more than I can bear. Yet I affirm, on my honor, that I believed what I said of myself to be true. And I had no intention of being rash merely to appear admirable to young ladies. I know you believed it, but I am not convinced you would act so. If you were mounting your horse and a friend merely said, Bingley, you had better stay another week, you would likely stay, and another entreaty might keep you for several months. Elizabeth exclaimed, There you have proved that Mr. Bingley is not doing justice to his own character. You speak more favorably of him than he does of himself. Bingley smiled and said, I am grateful for the compliment, though I fear you have turned the argument in a direction Darcy never intended, for he would certainly think well of me. In such circumstances, I should refuse at once and ride away as fast as possible. Would Mr. Darcy consider indecision or sudden changes of mind a fault that can be corrected while one remains stubbornly resolved? I cannot answer. Darcy must speak for himself, Darcy said. You wish me to explain an opinion which I have not yet acknowledged as mine. However, according to your representation, my dear Miss Bennet, you seem to forget that the friend only asked him to delay, not to change the propriety of his conduct. Yielding easily, yielding without conviction to a friend's persuasion seems of little worth to you. To yield without believing one ought to is neither rational nor praiseworthy. Then you do not believe in the influence of friendship or affection. When we truly care for someone who asks something of us, we yield without requiring the reasons behind the request. Perhaps we should wait for such a situation before deciding how he ought to act. But in ordinary cases between friends, if one expresses wish for the other to alter his plan, do you blame the person who complies without waiting for explanations? Should we not consider how important the request is, and how close the friendship? Indeed we should, said Bingley. Let us examine every detail. For without details the argument loses all its weight. I am certain that if Darcy were not taller than I am, my respect for him would be less than half. I have never seen anyone more imposing than Darcy in certain places and certain moments, especially at his own house on a Saturday evening when he has nothing to do. It makes no difference to me, and Darcy ought to finish his letter. Darcy followed her advice and completed his letter. When he had finished, he requested that Miss Bingley and Elizabeth favor him with some music. Miss Bingley eagerly went to the pianoforte and, after politely asking Elizabeth to play first, and Elizabeth politely refusing, she seated herself. Mrs. Hurst sang with her sister, and while Elizabeth turned over the music books lying on the instrument, she could not help noticing that Darcy's eyes were frequently fixed on her. She could not suppose herself the object of admiration to a man of his rank. Yet the idea that he looked at her with dislike seemed even more unlikely. At last she concluded that he merely noticed something in her that displeased him according to his own strict notions of conduct. The thought did not trouble her. She disliked him too much to care about his opinion. After playing a few Italian songs, Miss Bingley changed to a lively Scotch air. Immediately Darcy approached Elizabeth and said, "Miss Bennet, do you feel inclined to dance a reel?" She smiled but did not answer. He repeated the question, a little surprised at her silence. "Oh, I heard you perfectly well, but I wasn't sure how to answer. I know you intended me to accept so that you might despise my fondness for such amusements. But I delight in defeating such schemes, so I choose to tell you that I do not like to dance a reel. Now you may despise me if you dare. Indeed, I do not dare to despise you." Elizabeth had meant to provoke him and was surprised by his good humor. Yet her own nature playful, sweet, and lively made it difficult to quarrel seriously. And Darcy felt more bewitched than ever. He truly believed that, were it not for her inferior connections, he might be in danger. Miss Bingley observed enough to grow jealous. Her desire for Jane's speedy recovery increased, as did her desire to remove Elizabeth from the house. She continually tried to provoke Darcy's contempt for the Bennets by mentioning imaginary weddings or hinting at the mortification of such a family alliance. While walking with him in the shrubbery the next day, she said, "When that delightful event takes place, I trust you will give your mother-in-law some hints about keeping her mouth shut. And perhaps you might teach your sisters-in-law not to run after the officers. And if I may mention a delicate matter, you ought to restrain your wife's slight tendency toward impertinence." "Have you anything else to advise me on for my domestic felicity?" Darcy asked. "Oh yes, you must hang the portraits of your uncle and Aunt Phillips along the gallery at Pemberley opposite those of your noble relations. After all, they work in the same profession, though in different capacities. As for Elizabeth's portrait, do not trouble yourself, no artist could possibly do justice to such fine eyes. True, it is not easy to capture what is expressed in the eyes, but the shape and color may be rendered." At that moment they came upon Mrs. Hurst and Elizabeth, who were also walking. Miss Bingley looked embarrassed, fearing her words had been overheard. "I did not know you were here too," Mrs. Hurst said. "You wicked pair, to sneak off without telling us." She took Darcy's free arm, leaving Elizabeth alone. The narrow path would not admit four. Darcy, sensing the rudeness, said, "This path is too narrow for us all. Let us take the wider one." But Elizabeth, not wishing to join them, replied with a smile, "No, no, pray go on. Three make a charming group, but four would spoil the symmetry. I must beg your pardon." Then she sprang away lightly, enjoying the walk, her heart light with the hope that they might soon return home. Jane was much improved and felt well enough to leave her room that evening.